It all started on a quiet evening in my suburban backyard. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you want to light a fire and just relax after a long day. I had spent weeks gathering firewood for the perfect weekend bonfire, stacking each log carefully like a small fortress of warmth. But something was off. The next morning, I went outside and a chunk of my precious firewood was gone. At first, I thought maybe the wind had knocked some over, but this kept happening every few days. More firewood disappeared. I started noticing a familiar figure strolling past my yard with that self-satisfied, knowing look. It was Karen, the neighborhood HOA chair, notorious for her controlling nature and love for stirring up drama. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I was overreacting. But the pattern was undeniable. My frustration grew every time I caught her sneaking past, casually helping herself to what was mine. And I realized this wasn't just a petty inconvenience, this was personal. I needed a plan, something clever that would make her think twice before stealing again, but also something that would make a story worth remembering. I won't lie, the idea that came to me was a little explosive, but perfectly satisfying in a cinematic, dramatic way. From that moment, I became obsessed with the idea of turning the tables, and the next few days were all about observation, planning, and setting the stage for a lesson Karen would never forget. The question is, how far would I go to protect what's mine, and would she ever see it coming? It began with confusion more than anger. One chilly morning, I walked out to my backyard, planning to grab a few logs for a quiet fire, but half the stack was gone. At first, I thought maybe I miscounted or misplaced some pieces, but then it happened again 2 days later, another portion missing, perfectly scooped out as if someone had selected the best ones. That's when suspicion crept in. I started paying closer attention to the neighborhood, noticing patterns, footsteps, and shadows. And strangely enough, one person always seemed nearby, Karen, our HOA queen, who believed every house, yard, and mailbox fell under her command. Something told me this wasn't a coincidence. Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was the self-appointed sheriff of the block, always patrolling the sidewalks with a clipboard and a glare sharp enough to slice through concrete. If your grass grew half an inch too long, she'd knock. If your garbage can wasn't positioned perfectly, she'd leave a warning note. So when my firewood started disappearing, she was my first and only suspect. I noticed the smug smile she wore whenever she walked by my fence, the way she slowed down near the firewood stack. She acted like everything in the neighborhood belonged to her. I knew confronting her directly would only start a bigger drama, so I kept watching quiet, annoyed, and determined. The more I paid attention, the more obvious it became. Every time firewood went missing, Karen had been around the yard earlier that day. She thought she was being sneaky, glancing over her shoulder, looking at my house windows before snatching a few logs and stuffing them into a tote bag. One afternoon, I caught her on camera, blurry but recognizable enough. That was the final straw. I had worked hard chopping, drying, and stacking that firewood, and watching her take it like it was a free buffet made something snap inside me. Instead of anger, a new feeling took over: curiosity. How could I teach her a lesson she would never forget without saying a single word? I didn't want a boring confrontation. I wanted something clever, memorable, and let's be honest, a little theatrical. I brainstormed for hours, pacing around the backyard until the idea hit me: hollow logs. They would look real, feel real, and sit innocently in the stack. But inside, I would leave a surprise not dangerous, but dramatic enough to make Karen rethink her life choices. I grabbed a few old, partially rotted logs and began carving them from the inside, creating a shell that looked solid on the outside. It took patience, tools, and the kind of motivation only revenge can give. With every scrape of wood, I imagined Karen's face when she discovered what she had taken. I prepared several hollow logs, each crafted to look perfectly normal when resting in the stack. Inside them, I added a harmless but dramatic surprise, something that would make a loud pop when tossed into a fire. Nothing more. No harm, just a shock factor. I sealed the logs carefully, smoothing the edges and dusting them so no one could tell the difference. When I placed them back on top of the pile, they blended in perfectly. Standing back, I admired the masterpiece. It wasn't about danger, it was about poetic justice. I didn't want to hurt Karen. I wanted her to feel exactly what I felt when my things disappeared, startled, confused, and regret I didn't have to wait long. The very next morning, Karen strutted down the sidewalk with the confidence of a mall cop on duty. She glanced left, glanced right, then casually reached over my fence and grabbed logs, the hollow ones. I watched from behind my curtains as she tucked them into her bag and walked away like she had just completed an official HOA inspection. My heart pounded with anticipation. She had no idea what she had just taken home. That was the moment I knew the plan was working. All I had to do now was wait for the fireworks, literally and figuratively. Later that evening, I heard it through the stillness of the neighborhood. A sudden loud pop echoing from down the street, followed by Karen screaming in shock. Not injured, but thoroughly terrified. Lights flicked on in nearby houses, dogs started barking, and Karen stumbled into her driveway looking like she had seen a ghost. She kept shouting about faulty firewood and unsafe neighborhood conditions, trying to shift the blame onto anyone but herself. Neighbors peeked out from their doors, confused but somewhat amused. I watched from my window, hiding my smoke behind a mug of hot chocolate. She got her warning loud, harmless, unforgettable. The next morning, Karen walked past my house again, but this time she didn't even glance at the firewood stack. She stayed on the opposite side of the sidewalk, walking quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Word spread fast through the neighborhood, and suddenly, Karen wasn't as vocal, controlling, or nosy as before. As for me, I finally enjoyed my peaceful backyard fires without worrying about disappearing logs. The lesson wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries. Everyone has a limit, and sometimes the only way people learn is through a little creative reminder. And every time I light a fire now, I can't help but laugh at how one hollow log changed everything. After that chaotic night, the neighborhood slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. But something had changed. Karen no longer wandered near my yard, no longer inspected my property with that smug, entitled glare. The firewood sat untouched, stacked neatly, and finally, I could enjoy my backyard fires in peace. It wasn't just about the logs, it was about setting boundaries, claiming what's yours, and showing that petty theft has consequences. Sometimes the smallest actions speak louder than words, and in my case, a little creativity did the talking. As I sipped my coffee by the crackling fire, I couldn't help but smile, knowing that lesson was learned and I'd never have to worry about missing firewood again.